Welcome to episode 9. Today we will be covering the Axeman of New Orleans. And this is District Dark. New Orleans, March 1919. The city is awake, not lively, not relaxed, not out celebrating. Awake because people are scared. In homes across the city, families sit in lit rooms instead of going to bed. Men keep shotguns close by. Doors are checked again and again. Windows are watched. People listen for footsteps in the alleys, for movement near back doors, for any sound that does not belong. And all across New Orleans, music is playing. In the dance halls, in bars, in houses. Jazz. Not because the city suddenly decided to throw a party. Because a letter has appeared in the newspapers, a letter from someone claiming to be the man behind the string of bloody nighttime attacks. In it, he says he plans to kill again, but he also says he will pass over any house where jazz is playing. So the music starts, and the city waits. And the city waits. By then, people already know the pattern. A family goes to sleep. Sometimes in the night, someone comes in through the rear of the house. A panel is removed from a door, or a quiet way is found. Then the attack begins. Fast, violent, close. Some victims survive, some do not. No one knows who is doing it. No one knows where he will strike next. And even after the sun comes up, New Orleans still does not know whether the letter was a cruel joke, a real warning, or the voice of the killer himself. This is the story of the New Orleans Axeman. Tonight's case takes us to one of the most famous unsolved crime sprees in American history. Between 1918 and 1919, a series of brutal nighttime attacks shook New Orleans and nearby parts of Louisiana. The person linked to the crimes was never identified. In the years that followed, the case became part crime history and part local legend. But behind the legend were real people. Families attacked while asleep, homes turned into crime scenes, a city that became afraid of the dark, and a case that has never been fully closed. This is not a story with one clean ending. It is a story made of fear, confusion, weak evidence, changing witness statements, and a killer who seemed to disappear as suddenly he had appeared. Tonight, we are going to walk through the case slowly. The city, the victims, the pattern, the famous letter, the public panic, the suspects, and the reason the Axeman was never caught. To understand why the Axeman case hit New Orleans so hard, it helps to understand the city in 1918. New Orleans was already a city that lived loudly. Music, trade, street life, markets, noise, crowds, and neighbors packed close together. It was a port city, a working city, and a family where many immigrant families had built businesses and homes. Among them were Italian immigrants, many of whom ran small grocery stores. That matters because several of the best-known victims were grocers or members of grocer families. At the time, that led to talk about whether the attacks were connected by ethnicity, business rivalry, personal revenge, or something broader and less clear. Homes in these neighborhoods were not always large or well protected. Some families lived above stores or close to their work. Rear doors, alley access, courtyards, and outbuildings created private spaces that were not as private as people hoped, especially at night. And that is important in this case. Because the attacks often happened after dark and often through the rear of the house. The attacker did not usually burst in through the front door. He came in quietly, and by the time the households understood what was happening, the violence had already started. The first attack, usually tied to the Axeman, happened in May of 1918. Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine were at home in New Orleans. Joseph was a grocer. Sometime during the night, someone entered the home through a rear door. One report said a panel in the door had been removed. That detail would later show up again in the case. Inside, Joseph and Catherine were attacked with terrible force. Their throats were cut and both had severe head injuries. A bloody axe was found at the scene, and reports said it belonged to the victims themselves. That detail became one of the strangest and most frightening parts of the pattern. In several of the Axeman cases, the attacker did not seem to bring his own weapon. Instead, he appeared to use an axe found at the home or connected to the property. That meant the killer did not need to arrive carrying something obvious. He only needed a way in. Joseph and Catherine did not survive, and the scene left police with immediate questions. Was this a personal attack, a robbery, a revenge killing, or something else? At first, that was not easy to answer. The police looked at relatives, they looked at possible grudges, looked at people who might have had a reason to target the couple directly. That is normal in a double murder. You start close to the victims. But even in the earliest days, there were details that made the case feel different. The rear door entry, the use of an axe from the home, the speed and force of the attack, and the fact that whatever had happened, it had happened in the middle of the night while the victims were in bed. This first case was shocking on its own. What made it worse was what came next. Only weeks later, in June of 1918, another attack took place. This time, the victims were Louis Bessumer and Harriet Lowe. They were found badly injured after being attacked with an axe while in bed. Once again, the basic shape of the crime looked familiar. A nighttime attack inside the home, severe head wounds, entry that suggests the attacker had chosen a quiet path in. And again, confusion over motive. Unlike the Maggio case, this one did not end with both victims dying at once. Bessumer survived the initial attack. Harriet Lowe also survived for a time, but later died after surgery. That meant investigators had a different kind of case. They had living victims, at least briefly, but that did not automatically mean they had a clear account. Statements changed, there was confusion, police followed some lines that focused more on the personal lives of the victims than on the larger pattern. In fact, for a time, the case pulled attention in other directions entirely, and suspicion landing on people close to them. This is one reason the Axeman case stayed difficult from the beginning. Even when crimes looked linked, police still had to ask whether each one might have its own personal explanation. That slows everything down, and in older cases, once early time is lost, a killer can disappear into that confusion very quickly. Still, by this point, people in New Orleans had begun to notice that two violent home attacks, closely together with similar features, might not be random, and if they were not random, then the city might have a serial attacker. At first, people hear about a killing and assume it belongs to the house alone. Maybe there was bad blood, maybe it was awful but limited. Then another case appears, and another, and slowly people stop hearing separate stories. They start hearing one story repeated with different names. A house at night, a quiet entry, a sleeping victim, an axe, no clear suspect. This is when fear changes shape. It stops being sympathy for another family and becomes something closer, something personal, something people carry into their homes. By the summer of 1918, that change had begun. In August 1918, another attack deepened the pattern. Joseph Schneider was attacked while sleeping in his home. He survived, but the details again sounded familiar. He had been struck in the head with an axe after someone entered during the night. Here again was the same broad shape: night, home, sleeping, blunt force attack, quiet entry, and once again people were left with a victim but no clear killer. As more of these attacks were linked together in the public mind, the killer began to take on a name: the Axeman. That name matters because it helped give the crimes a single identity, even before police had proven a single suspect. Once a series gets a name, it becomes easier for the public to follow it, fear it, and remember it. It also becomes easier for the newspapers to build a story around it. and the newspapers were a major part of this case. They carried the details, they carried the fear, and later, they would carry the letter that made the Axeman famous far beyond New Orleans. After the attacks in 1918, there was a gap. Then, in March of 1919, the violence returned. That return is important because a gap can do strange things in a case like this. Some people start believing the danger has passed. Others think the killer may have died, left town, or had been arrested for something else. Police attention shifts. Public fear cools, at least a little. Then another family is attacked and everything comes rushing back. This is what happened in March 1919. Charles Cortamilia, his wife Rosie, and their young daughter Mary were sleeping when someone entered the home. All three were attacked. Charles survived, Rosie survived, their daughter Mary did not. This attack struck the city hard. A child has now been killed in a case already known for brutal nighttime violence. That deepened the fear and made the case feel even more senseless. Then things became even more confused. In the aftermath, Rosie accused Frank Giordano and his son Mike of carrying out the attack. They were arrested. At first, it looked as if the police might finally have the answer, at least for this crime. But then Rosie changed her story. She withdrew the accusation and said she had blamed them under pressure and confusion. That reversal wrecked the case against them, and that matters because it shows something important about the Axeman investigation overall. Even when the police got close to a suspect in one attack, that evidence often would not hold. Witnesses were frightened, hurt, and unsure. Statements shifted. Physical evidence was limited, and what looked promising at first often dissolved when it had to stand up under closer examination. So, once again, the city was left with the same problem. A family attacked in their home, a dead victim, no lasting solution. By 1918, the Axeman was no longer just a police problem. He was a citywide fear. People began changing the way they lived at night. Families often stayed awake later. Men guarded homes with guns and clubs. Neighbors listened for sounds near back doors and alleys. Some people avoided sleeping alone. Others brought relatives into the house for the night. You can feel the difference between fear and panic in a case like this. Fear is personal, panic is public. Panic changes how the whole city behaves, and by spring 1919, New Orleans had reached that point. The attacks had been repeated too many times, the killer had not been caught, and then the letter appeared. In March 1919, a letter signed by someone claiming to be the Axeman was sent to local newspapers. The letter was bizarre, threatening, and theatrical. The writer claimed he was not an ordinary man. He described himself in demon-like terms. He mocked police. He said he would strike again on certain Tuesday night, but he also made one very strange promise. He said he would spare any home where jazz music was playing. That one claim changed everything, because whether the letter was truly from the killer or not, people believed it might be, and once they believed, the city acted. On the night named in the letter, New Orleans filled with music. Dance halls were crowded. Bands played late. Families kept phonographs running. Private homes hosted musicians. People who may not have cared much about jazz before cared deeply that night because they thought music might stand between them and a murderer. No attack tied to the Axeman happened that night. The fact became part of the legend. But even there, the case stays slippery. Did the killer really write the letter? Did he decide not to strike because of the music? Did he never plan to strike at all? Was the writer only feeding panic? Those questions have never been settled. But the effect of the letter is not in doubt. It made the Axeman larger than a hidden attacker. It turned him into a voice in the public mind. That night deserves its own place in the story because it says so much about the city and about the case. Imagine it. A city already known for music now playing music out of fear. A city using sound as a shield. That is one reason the Axeman became such a lasting part in New Orleans history. The crimes were brutal, but the image people remember is often this one. Jazz pouring out into the night while families wait for the morning. It is one of the strangest scenes in American crime history, and it happened because the city had reached a point or even a wild claim in a newspaper letter felt worth obeying. This is how deep the fear had gone. The attacks did not end with the letter. Later in 1919, more incidents were linked to the Axeman. In August, there was an attack on Annunciated Andalina, who was struck in her home. Reports connected the case to the same series because of the way the attack happened and the broad similarities in the method. Then, in September, another well-known case entered the story, the killing of Mike Pepitone. Pepitone was attacked in his home by an intruder using an axe. His wife reportedly saw the attacker fleeing. This was one of the last major crimes tied to the Axeman. And again, the same features returned: a nighttime entry, a sleepy victim, a fast axe attack. A killer gone before police could catch him? These later cases mattered because they showed that even after the citywide panic, even after the famous letter, and even after people were actively watching for him, the killer or killers behind these crimes could still strike and escape. Then, as strangely as the spree had begun, it seemed to stop. One of the hardest parts of the Axeman case is deciding exactly which crimes belong to it. Historians, writers, and crime researchers do not always use the exact same list. Some attacks look strongly connected, others are debated. That happens in old serial cases more often than people realize. Once a pattern becomes famous, similar crimes can get folded into it. Sometimes that is correct, sometimes it is not. Sometimes police at the time linked the cases because they had little else to work with. And sometimes later writers linked cases because the similarities felt too strong to ignore. In the Axeman case, that means one big question stays in the background the whole time. Was this truly one offender, or were several violent home attacks gathered into one large story because the city needed a name and a pattern? There is no clear answer. Some cases look very close in method, some do not fit as neatly, and because the investigations never produced a solid named suspect for the whole series, that question never fully went away. It is also important to remember what police work looked like in 1918 and 1919. There was no DNA testing, crime scenes were easier to contaminate, witnesses were often injured, frightened, and inconsistent. Fingerprints existed, but the criminal investigation was still nothing like what modern audiences expect from today's cases. Police also worked under pressure from newspapers and public fear. That can shape an investigation in bad ways. It can push officers toward the fastest answer instead of the best one. It can lead to a rushed arrest, weak cases, and too much weight put on a rumor. And rumors were everywhere in this case. There were rumors about gangs, rumors about revenge, rumors about anti-Italian violence, rumors about business disputes, rumors about madmen, and rumors about demons because the letter itself leaned into that kind of language. All of that makes a case harder to solve because a good investigation needs facts to stay louder than fear. In an Axeman case, fear was often louder. Over the years, different suspects have been mentioned. Some were tied to one crime, not all of them. Some were accused by wounded witnesses and later cleared or left unsupported. Some names appeared later in books or articles long after the crimes, but the central truth is simple. No suspect was ever proven to be the New Orleans Axeman, and that matters. Because old unsolved cases often grow suspect over time, whether the evidence supports it or not. People want closure. They want a face attached to the fear. But wanting a name and proving a name are different things. In the Axeman case, the police had arrests and some visual attacks, but those cases broke down or failed to solve the wider pattern. No one has ever definitely shown to be the man behind the whole series, so the killer remained what he had been from the start: unseen, unnamed, and free. It is easy, with a case this old, to let the nickname take over the story, the Axeman. It sounds dramatic, it sounds like folklore, it sounds like the kind of thing that belongs on a poster or in a ghost story. But the real case is not the nickname. It is Joseph and Catherine Maggio, Louis Bessumer and Harriet Lowe, Charles, Rosie, and Maria Cordelia, Joseph Schneider, Mike Pepitone, and others tied to the pattern. Real people in real homes attacked in the middle of ordinary nights. That part matters because the legend can flatten everything. It can make a case sound like atmosphere instead of violence. But this was not only a spooky old mystery, it was a chain of brutal home attacks that left real families injured, grieving, and terrified. The city remembered the music and the letter. The victims lived the rest of it. One reason the Axeman case stayed alive in memory is that it did not end with an arrest. It simply stopped. That kind of ending leaves room for too many possibilities. Maybe the killer died. Maybe he left New Orleans. Maybe he was jailed under another name for another crime. Maybe the attacks were committed by more than one person, and the pattern only seemed to end because the case stopped lining up the same way. No one knows. And that uncertainty kept the case open in public imagination. A caught killer becomes history. An uncaught killer becomes something else. A rumor, a symbol, a story people keep telling because the missing answer bothers them. That is what happened here. In the years after the attacks, the Axeman became part of New Orleans' memory in a way few killers ever do. Part of that is because New Orleans already carries a history differently than many cities. Its stories stay close to the street, music, rumor, tragedy, folklore, and local identity all mixed together. The Axeman fit into that world too well. A nighttime killer, a threatening letter, a city playing jazz to survive the night. It was almost too strange to fade away, so the case stayed alive in books, articles, tours, retelling, and crime history. But more it was retold, the more the edges blurred. And this is what happens to old cases. The facts remain, then the facts gather shadows. And after enough time, people begin arguing not just about who did it, but about what exactly happened in the first place. With a case like this, it helps to stop and say what can be said clearly. Between 1918 and 1919, a series of violent nighttime home attacks took place in New Orleans and nearby areas. Several of those attacks shared important features: entry through the rear of the home, victims attacked while asleep, head wounds from an axe or similar weapon, and no lasting arrests. Many of the victims were part of Italian immigrant families or connected to grocer business. A letter signed by someone claiming to be the Axeman was published in 1919 and caused citywide panic. No suspect was ever definitely proven to be the Axeman, and the crimes remain unsolved. That is the case at its center. Everything else lives around it. Questions about which crimes belong, questions about motive, questions about the letter, questions about whether one man did it all, questions about whether the police ever came close to and did not realize it. Those questions remain open. There's something about a home invasion case that never gets old in the public mind. A person attacked on a dark road feels exposed. A person attacked in a business feels unlucky. But a person attacked while asleep in bed touches a different fear. Because bed is where some people think they are safe. Behind a locked door, in a familiar room, beside family. The Axeman case broke that idea apart. That is one reason it still works on people more than 100 years later. Not because it is old, because its fear inside it is still easy to understand. The New Orleans Axeman was never identified. No final suspect closed the case. No courtroom explained the pattern. No full confession ended the story. What remains is a bloody nighttime attacks, a city thrown into fear, a letter that changed public behavior, and a killer who vanished back into history. For a stretch of 1918 and 1919, families in New Orleans went to bed knowing that someone might come through the back door before morning. Some of them never woke up the same, and when the attacks finally stopped, the city was left with the worst kind of ending. Not certainty, not justice, only silence, and the knowledge that whoever had done it was never named.